The birth of Isaac was delayed, and that is interesting as we look at the passages that deal with it. Abraham, when he received the promise, was how old? About when he received the promise. Yeah, about 75. That's right. That's right. And Sarah was about 65. So this is 25 years. That's quite a while, isn't it? Between the time that Abraham was told that he would have a child and the time that he was actually born. Sarah was 90 when Isaac was born and circumcised. So that's a little aged situation for her at that time. She was beyond the age of bearing children ordinarily as we go. So that has raised some questions, actually, among biblical students through the years, whether Isaac was born in some way miraculously. And apparently, through a normal process of cohabitation between Abraham and Isaac. So he is truly the son of Abraham. But it is an interesting question. God must have preserved her physical abilities in some way, we would expect, if that's the case here. Isaac was the son of the promise, and that's what we want to note as we go along. That's what we want to kind of focus on in every one of our studies through the book of Genesis, because it all goes back to this promise to Abraham and these people's role in that being accomplished as we go along. Well, after Isaac was weaned, Abraham made a feast, and it was a joyful time in their family, but he was mocked by Ishmael. Don't know exactly what all was said in those situations there. We're not privy to all of the particulars of this, except that we're told that Ishmael made fun of Isaac. And so God told Abraham to send Ishmael and his mother Hagar away from them. Now, she went away, but she came back. And we don't know much about this situation with Isaac. We don't know much about his early days in that time as we go along. We're not sure how long it was before we get Isaac back in the picture. But God determined to prove Abram's faith, Isaac's father's faith, and he told him to take Isaac into the land of Moriah and offer him for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains. We would kind of like to know how old Isaac was when this takes place. Why do you think we're not told? Is there a reason, do you think, from our perspective, we don't like to ask too much about God's reasons for doing what God does when He doesn't tell us, do we? But it might be kind of nice for us to know how old He is. Why would He not tell us how old Isaac is? Anybody got a thought, a possibility? Ed? Did you all get that? Ed says it may be that it would be easier for him if it was a teenager. Okay. Yeah. Michael, did you have a comment? He is. Yeah. Ian? Uh-huh. I like what I think is your idea here, that it may be left open to us so that at any age it would impact us the most to think about sacrificing our son. The story hits us. It comes to us. It takes us. Yes. Interesting thought, isn't it? So you would expect he would be younger, probably, and not as involved in the sins of the world and the thinking of the world and all of that. That's an interesting line of thought, isn't it? I'm not sure I had ever pursued it from that perspective exactly. Yes. Exactly. And he knows about the sacrifices already. Well, from Abraham, God wanted complete obedience. He wanted complete surrender. So, from Abraham's perspective, this is a real test, isn't it? The land of Moriah is what the text says he was going to. And this was north, obviously, from Beersheba. Beersheba was in the very south part of the land that they went to. It's thought to be in the Jerusalem area, perhaps on one of the mountains of Jerusalem. Isaac was offered there. If you go into the mosque on the temple grounds, they have located, they say, where the altar was that Abraham built to offer Isaac on. And it's in this mosque in the middle of Jerusalem. If you've been over there and have seen what they say on that. They were living at Hebron, which is a city 20 miles south of Jerusalem. That's where Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah when Sarah dies a little later on. Hebron became a Levitical city of refuge, if you remember the cities of refuge that we're told about in the book of Joshua. And it was the first capital of King David. He was there, how was it, 6.5 or 7.5 years before he moved the capital to Jerusalem. So Hebron's important, Jerusalem's important as we get into this. Now, I do want to get us back for a moment to Abraham's thinking about all of this. We talk about the sacrifice, and that is the emotional part, at least part of the emotional part of this problem, this test, we'll call it, problem for Abraham, I suppose, while he was enduring it. But we talk about the sacrifice of the boy as being the real test. Maybe the big test for Abraham is the promise itself, because the promise itself on which his whole life, from the time that he had received it from God, was built, was based, was that he would have a son, and through that son, and that had been reaffirmed. You remember last week we talked about how that Abraham thought, maybe this will come through Eliezer, my servant in my house. The promise will. And Sarah had said, let's do it through Hagar. You see, they had been challenged by that promise in their faith all along. So when we talk about faith, we cannot let this idea of what the promise was escape our minds as we study Abraham's faith. What was his faith in? And so here God tells him, go kill the one that I told you the promise would come through. Now, how was he to take that? 25 years he had left his home in Ur of the Chaldees, and he had come into this strange land. How would Sarah take it? And we really don't have much information about how much Sarah knew about what was going on. You want to comment on that? Anybody? It's a difficult situation to think about what Isaac's mother would say about all of this. If she knew, then her faith is going to have to stand. with Abraham's faith in our minds, don't you think? If she knew. So there are a lot of kind of personal questions that come up as you look at the life of Isaac, the early life of Isaac, and some of these situations that we get in. Abram's faith was tested not only by having to put the boy to death, but by having to give up the means through which God had said his promises would be fulfilled. How would he imagine that this could come out with any kind of integrity for himself and for God? Do we have any hint in Scripture? How, Wayne? Yes. That's what the book of Hebrews says, isn't it? Hebrews kind of lets us off the hook in terms of our question on this, doesn't it? It gives us a possible scenario in Abraham's mind of how this could be and work out. And so his faith is going to be placed still in God all along. Got it? So we've kind of looked at Abraham. We haven't resolved what Isaac would be thinking. We were talking a while ago, I think Wayne maybe commented that he was old enough. He was old enough to understand that they needed that lamb for an offering because he asked his dad, "Where's the lamb?" So he knew what sacrifices were about. See? Well, they arrived at Moriah on the third day. There is an interesting comment I just have to note for you. In the early part of this story, when God told Abraham to go and offer Isaac, the text says, Abraham rose early in the morning to go do what God said to do. You know, if there was ever a reason to kind of put things off, if you haven't obeyed the gospel and people put it off and put it off and put it off, look at Abraham. Because Abraham got up early in the morning to go do what God told him to do. He didn't put it off at all. He didn't wait for a convenient time. You all can hear my sermon on this, can't you? back, I think, when I was not out of my teens and trying to preach the gospel, I had a sermon on this. So it's a long time thing with me, this one. And it's an important point, I think. I'll just leave it with you. Okay. Mount Moriah was apparently where Jerusalem was later built. So we've got that. When Isaac asked about the lamb for the burnt offering, his father replied, God will provide. God will provide. So this may be one of Wayne's early sermons or Matt's. God will provide everything we need, Paul said to the Philippians, and he will provide particularly everything we need to obey him and to do his will. As I said, it's interesting to ask concerning Isaac's age, and we don't really know. But whatever age you want to think, I've got a boy who's 50 years old now. And boy, it would put me to the test. Yes. Good point. Good point. So he seemed to have faith that God was. That's right. Do you all get that? That's right. And he told his servants waiting down the hill, we will return to you. So that's his faith. Never wavered, did it? Can you? It's almost amazing the faith that Abraham had, and the story reveals all of that to the children of Israel, and they considered Abraham the father of the faithful, didn't they? Because of it. So, you finished reading on your slide. Good to teach one's son about the worship of God. Isaac apparently knew what they needed for sacrifice. So Abraham built the altar, strapped Isaac to it, and went so far as to raise the knife to slay his son. Now, our lesson today is about Isaac. So what do you think he's thinking? Yeah. Say it. He submitted to his father. Do you think Abraham had explained to him that God was directing this? You don't think so? No, he didn't say it's you. I think so. Seems to be, doesn't it? Seems to be. He is never challenged in the biblical text in any way. I mean, he's never put off because of anything he did to stop this or to question it even. Yes. Yeah. If he was objecting, yeah. Lots of things we'd like to know about this, isn't there? Would be interesting to have a video of this. All right. Well, the angel said, stop, when he raised his arm with the knife. Can you imagine Abraham's relief when that happened? So a ram was seen caught in the thicket and was used for the offering. And they sacrificed what God provided, as Abraham had said. It was as if Isaac had been raised from the dead by God's grace. So we compare what God asked Abraham to do with what God later actually did. And it's a view into the future. The events of our story are, aren't they? Really a comparison that should not be overlooked as we go. Okay, question anybody? Anything else you want to bring up? Yes. It's hard to say because the Canaanite idolatry seems to have developed after that with the sons of Ishmael and the sons of Abraham, the Midianites, and yeah, see, the Edomites are not developed nationally yet. It's a kind of an open country. Abraham is not really given the land. The Israelites are not given the land till Moses in the book of Exodus. And these foreign nations develop out of Abraham's family, actually. Midian was one of Keturah's sons. Jacob and Esau are the fathers of Israel and Edom. So Lot is going to be the father of the Ammonites and the Moabites. You remember those stories? They're yet to come in the text. So it's kind of hard to say. I think I wonder about it too, exactly as you do, but that's an interesting point. Okay? Yes. Yeah. I would think he would never forget it, whatever his response. Yes, he does. Yeah, yeah. It really is. Really is impressive. Yes. No. Yeah. 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 And that's our point. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And Jesus died. Isaac did not, but he pictures what's coming. Okay, we better rush on. Abraham called the place Jehovah Jireh. God will see and God will provide. So the promise was repeated to Abraham, and Abraham returned to Beersheba after this test. Okay. The death of Isaac's mother takes place. In Genesis chapter 23, we're told Sarah was 127 when she died at Hebron. Abraham came up from Beersheba to mourn for her. Abraham went to the children of Heth. He purchased a burial place. This is important because they bring their dead in the immediate family, in the immediate line of the patriarchs, back to the cave of Machpelah at Hebron for burial, at least some of them, not all of them. Abraham insisted on paying the price so that he wouldn't be beholden to anybody in a later time for what happened. So this is a picture of right thinking in times of sorrow. Abraham showed love for Sarah, courtesy to others, paid for his burial cave, and he showed respect for God. Although God had promised this land to Abraham, he was not unjust to its present owners. So God was going to give him the land eventually, or at least his seed, but he paid for the cave. He didn't wish to be indebted. This last point on this slide I thought I would let you think about. It's a sad glimpse into the life of Abraham when he comes back and he says, "Give me a possession of a burying place that I may bury my dead out of my sight." That's so sad to me. Hard thing to do. Hard thing to do. Okay, now then, we come to chapter 24 of Genesis, and we'll take a look quickly at Rebekah, who is Isaac's wife. And this is a story in itself as well. Abraham was old. He asked his elder servant, that may have been that same Eliezer that we had before. He asked him to swear that he would go to the country of his father to secure a wife for Isaac. Abraham was concerned that Isaac's wife not be a Canaanite woman. And their son will have this problem a little later on with marrying women out of faith. So Abraham was deeply concerned about that. The servant was hesitant. Abraham insisted that God would send an angel to direct him in this choice. So the servant swore by putting his hand in Abraham's thigh, inside his loin area. That was a symbol to them of the deepest kind of agreement. It was a covenant between them, basically, to choose this wife and to go and to get one. So the servant went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Now, let's remember our family ties we had, okay? Haran and Nahor were Abraham's brothers. Haran was dead. He had died back down in Ur. Nahor was Abraham's brother. So he sent this servant to his brother's house. up in Padan Aram or in Haran. So he stopped at the well at evening when the women come out for water, and he prayed to God to give him a sign that the woman who offered to water his camels would be the chosen wife of Isaac. And this servant was a man of obedience and faith, as we know. So Rebekah, Abraham's brother's granddaughter, came out and fulfilled this sign. See, here's her lineage now. Remember, her great-grandfather was Terah. Her grandfather was Nahor, Abraham's brother. Her grandmother was Milcah, and that was Haran's wife. So she's a blue blood, isn't she? Her father was Bethuel, that's Abraham's nephew, Laban's father. Later we'll see Laban's her brother. And he would be the father of Rachel and Leah. So they would go through this same process. See, we got Rebekah in here out of Abraham's brother's family, and we're going to get Rachel and Leah out of the family a little later, right? For Jacob's wives. All right? Don't forget. So they agreed that Rebekah should go to Isaac and be Isaac's wife. And the servant gave gifts to Rebekah and to her family. Laban, her brother, and Bethuel, her father, said, "This thing comes from the Lord. We cannot speak to you either good or bad." So this is providence in the selection of a wife. Y'all believe in providence? Okay. We do very much. So Rebekah is Isaac's wife. Isaac dwelt in the south. He came out from Beer-lahai-roi. Remember, Hagar had named that well there at Beer-lahai-roi. So they came from there. So Isaac saw the servant and Rebekah coming. The servant identified Isaac to Rebekah. They fell in love immediately, apparently. They both are excited about this marriage. And they were married in Genesis 24 is the record of that. Okay? Now this, very quickly, I'll just mention Abraham married again. He dies, and Isaac and Ishmael come up to Hebron there and bury Abraham in the cave of Machpelah alongside Sarah. So Isaac is involved there. Abraham is 175 years old. So it's been 100 years since the promise, hasn't it? Okay, everybody keeping up? The statement that Abraham was gathered to his fathers is interpreted often as an indication of faith in future life for us. I think Jesus will verify that when he says God is not the God of the dead, he is the God of the living, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are mentioned as living. So you can put all of that together. All right, now Isaac will have two sons eventually. Isaac, how old is Isaac when he marries Rebekah? Say it. 40. He's 40. She will be barren now for how long after their marriage? She'll not have children for how long? 20 years. The text tells us 20 years. So Isaac is 40 when he marries Rebekah. The child doesn't come for 20 years. When Rebekah conceived, she conceives twins, 2 boys. The Lord said that the sons were 2 nations. And she says, amen, they're fighting in my body. Isn't that pretty much what she says? We can expect. Well, one was going to be stronger than the other. The elder would serve the younger, we are told. We'll get more on that. The elder son is named Esau. That means red or ruddy, and apparently he was hairy from birth. He was a hunter. The younger son was Jacob, and that word means a supplanter. He had hold of Esau's heel at birth. Now the text says he was a mild, and I tried to run that down a little bit to see what it meant. Literally, that word means complete. He was complete. I think that suggests more thoughtful or something like that in the text. And he was quiet, the ESV says. He was a quiet person, dwelling in tents, content to dwell in tents. So they're different personalities, totally different personalities. Rebekah favored Jacob at home. The dad favored the football player, the hunter, the sportsman. Okay? Kind of how it is often in families. Okay, now I have just a few minutes here. I want to make a point for us. So I'm going to skip some things we could talk about. But Esau came in from the field hungry. He was confronted by this mess of pottage, a pot full of stew, I guess. And he agreed to sell his birthright. Let's just take a look. The birthright. What is the birthright? The birthright is the eldest son's inheritance. And he inherits a double portion of the division of the inheritance to the children upon death. There was purpose in that from God's point of view. We'll have the law explain that a little later on. But the birthright provided a double portion. The one receiving the birthright became responsible as the family leader. And he's given a double portion to take care of responsibility. He would have to take care of his mother after this. He would have to take care of the family possessions. He would have to see to the distribution of other things, and he would have to take care of the land that belonged to that family. So he would have responsibilities. There's a reason for the birthright. So he sold his birthright. Now I'm going to jump ahead here. And I want you to notice later, Jacob will swindle his brother out of the blessing, the family blessing. And apparently that was the dad blessing one of the sons who would be the ones through whom God's promises, God's blessings would come, through whom the promise would come. You see? So the birthright and the blessing now are two different things. And we need probably to recognize that as we go. So here's the blessing. Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. The Lord has blessed. See, this is coming from Isaac to Jacob. Therefore, may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren. Let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. And see, does that ring a bell when God made the promise to Abraham? So the blessing passes God's favors on to the son. And we're going to see Jacob pass it on later. Who will he pass it on to? Judah, who is the fourth son. We'll see. We'll talk about that when we get there. But the blessing will be passed on when Jacob dies down in Egypt a little later on. Right? Okay? You rang the second bell? You didn't ask.